Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome to New York University, Casa Italiana, Zerilli-Marimò. We started last week, but I was not feeling well. So today is my official inauguration of the academic year. And I'm thrilled to be here rather than when I was. And I'm thrilled to be here to begin our adventure of this academic year with this forgotten gem, this conversation that Antonio Monda will have with Ken Jones, that, as you know, is part of a larger series of conversations called, in Italian, Le Conversazioni. It's an international, really international festival that Antonio Monda and his partner Davide Solini have organized, starting in Capri, not a bad place to start anything, mind you. And then it branched out from Bogota, Colombia to Palermo, Rome, and of course New York. And we're very proud to be one of their strongholds, of their the places where they hold more regularly their encounters. And in particular, this series, I'm very attached to because it gives me, first of all, a great viewing list of films that I might have missed, I might have overlooked, and that are back on my radar thanks to the recommendations of Antonio and his guests throughout the year. You know everything about Antonio Monda. I always say that after me, he's probably the person that has been on this stage more often. And I couldn't praise enough his generosity as a colleague in bringing to this stage all sort of people from all kinds of artistic path and career, and we are very grateful for the constant energy that he puts in everything he does here at the Casa. And tonight, of course, he has the fortune of being with Ken Jones, who is a film critic, a filmmaker, a director, an author, and we cannot wait to hear about their forgotten gems that they're helping us to dig out and bring back to life. Please welcome Antonio Monda and Ken Jones.
You're so far away.
Buonasera. Welcome back to Le Conversazioni. Thank you, Stefano, for your generous introduction. Thank you, Ken Jones. Ken and I go back 20, 30 years, maybe?
20 years, 25 years.
Among the many things that we did together, we co-curated for Lincoln Center a series on Ermanno Olmi, a filmmaker that we both like. And I'm very proud and I'm still honored to have shared this with you.
As am I.
As you know, the format is very simple. I ask my guests to pick 3 films that, according to them, are underrated, overlooked, forgotten. I do the same, and we say to you why we think they're good films. So since the program is quite long, then there is a surprise at the end. Oh. I will start with Kent, first choice. Do you want to show first the clip, or do you want to say something first?
I guess show the clip, because I don't know. I guess you're going in chronological order.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's not chronological.
Yeah, show the first clip. Yeah.
So let's start with Kent's first choice. So this is Numero by Jean Eustache. First of all, I want to ask you, why did you pick this? And then I have a few questions about the film.
Because it's one approach to cinema. Which is, it would be an analogous film, an American film would be Italian American by Marty Scorsese, where his parents just talk. But it's not just about talking, it's about catching with the camera and the microphone someone's being. I was just reading a little bit about how Bob Fosse used to study people, and he would say the way that people move is their autobiography. Of course, he was a dancer and a choreographer, so it's just like, that's the way he saw things. But he would look at just a little, when he choreographed, he would choreograph people's pinkies and their eyes. And so I think that when I'm watching this, what I see is a whole, not just a whole, her life, I see the life around her, and I see the whole world that she lived in coming to life. And it's in the way that she speaks, the rhythm, the way that she talks about these horrendous...
Did we say she's the grandmother?
She's his grandmother, and he just put the camera on her and said, let's have some whiskey. They're drinking, I forget what, rye or something like that, and smoking incessantly, and just talking. And she says things like, well, there's another moment when she's just like, yeah, terrible things happen. I remember one night there was a baby, the woman had the baby, and it was just all too much for her, and the baby fell into the boiling water, and what are you going to do? And you're just like, oh my God. But the thing is that these were people who went through real hardships, and of course, what else were they going to do? It's like the moment in Shoah when, the guy is smiling, and Claude Lanzmann says, why are you smiling? And he says, what do you want me to do, cry? And so I think that it's a film that I find so rich, the way that she describes her life, her gestures, the way that she keeps doing this with the table and the smoking and the rhythm of her voice. I find it, it's a pretty remarkable film.
Eustache started as a film critic for Le Cahiers du Cinéma, but we cannot consider him as part of the Nouvelle Vague.
No. But some people would. Some friends of mine would. I think that at a certain point it became almost a rite of passage for every French filmmaker of a certain stripe for a while to just start as a critic, usually for Cahiers du Cinéma.
How do you see this film in comparison with the Chantal Akerman extraordinary film Jean Duniel?
Jean Dielman?
Yeah, Jean Dielman.
Well, no, because that's a film that's a very carefully choreographed, very carefully staged work about repetitive work and the drudgery and the oppression of it. I think that there are other films that Chantal made that I might compare it to. For instance, her last film, which is one of my favorites of hers.
The one with her mother.
With her mother, which is just her document of her mother, which is just shattering. And I remember we invited that to the New York Film Festival, and I heard from her, and she said, I want to come, but I'm having some trouble. And then in the middle of the festival, we got the news that she had killed herself. As Jean Eustache did.
As Jean Eustache did. And there is a famous quote. He said once that all my films are autobiographical as fiction is.
Mm-hmm.
How do you read this? There is no difference between fiction and real life, maybe?
All my films are autobiographical as fiction is, as all fiction is?
Yes.
It sort of relates to this question of the bodily autobiography that Bob Fosse was talking about and that you see in this. I mean, The Mother and the Whore, which is his most famous film. And
almost 3 hours. Okay.
Yeah, over 3 hours.
Over 3.
And it's a great film, and it's also, there's a lot of dialogue in it. It's just a lot of people talking, but then the thing about dialogue is that when people think about it, they say, boy, he writes great dialogue or something like that, Preston Sturges or Eric Romer. If it's just dialogue, then it's no good. When the dialogue is action, and it's the action of speaking it, that's something else. That's the reason that Eric Romer is good and that Preston Sturges was good. But, I think... Yeah.
Do you see today any hair to his work? Anyone who
to Jean Eustache?
Or is just a unique filmmaker?
Another thing that I suppose that struck me about this particular film, he had released a kind of a truncated version of this earlier called Odette Robert. That was her name. And but this is the proper version. And I think that I'm always hearing about people wanting movies to be kind of like easy, tolerable, nice, unoffensive or something like that. And I just think, why? What are you trying to protect yourself from? I mean, what she went through is the kind of thing that I was trying to embody with my movie, with the scene of all the aunts around the table talking about the kid that fell down the well. It's just like, these are hardships that people went through. And, they're hand in hand with the love and with the affection. And so, but in terms of him being, someone being an heir to him, I'm not sure that he's a filmmaker who you can follow so easily. I don't know.
Okay, let's go now to my first choice. It's an Italian film, but filmed in France by Ettore Scola. Let's watch it.
Yeah.
Who else, if not Marcello Mastroianni, can play Casanova? So I want to be honest. Among the great Italian filmmakers, Ettore Scola, who is definitely an important filmmaker, is not in my pantheon. he made at least a couple of great films. C'eravamo tanto amati,
Yes,
and
totally,
A Special Day, una giornata particolare. But I think this is an underrated, overlooked, forgotten films. The reason why I really don't admire him as much as I do with Fellini, Olmi, De Sica, and others, Rossellini, is because he started as a screenwriter, and he was a brilliant screenwriter. He wrote all the Pietrangeli film, he wrote Il Sorpasso, and he wrote his own films. And I have always the feeling that he wants to show that he can direct, even in this scene. The camera movement, it's so over the top and so
in an impossible space. I mean, obviously they mixed and matched.
And the other reason is that it's way too ideological for my taste. Not in this film.
Way too what?
Ideological.
Ideological.
But this film is quite interesting because Scola was from the south. He was from Trevico, which is a small village near Avellino, although he was raised in Rome. And he started his career working for Il Marco Aurelio together with Federico Fellini and Maccari and many other great screenwriters. Some of his films are set in France, and they look like French films. So he demonstrated it is not true that we should just talk about ourselves. He is able to make a truly French film with an Italian soul. And I like that. There is another reason. The way he depicts the king, played by, I think, Michel Piccoli. We see only his legs in the film. And we're talking about Louis XVI, who will be beheaded very soon, shows a surprising respect. When I see a film, when I watch a film and I'm surprised, I'm always happy. Because you imagine from Scola an horrifying depiction of kings and aristocrats. In this film, you see something completely different and much more, with several nuances. Yeah. How do you like Scola, and how do you like this film?
Well, I like that period in Italian cinema because, I mean, if you're interested in cinema, you kind of, how can you not? I mean, he's not
1982.
Yeah, I mean, he's not Francesco Rosi, but he's I'm convinced, as like becomes, in my mind, really one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived, and and at the same time he was at the height of his powers then. But I mean, it's amazing when there are moments when, great films, what we call masterpieces, are always few and far between. But I mean, the great moments are when the good films are very good.
Yes.
When everything kind
the
of...
average is very high.
Yes, that's right. So, I mean, really in Hollywood for a long time, and in Taiwan for a certain period of time, in Iran for a certain period of time, you would have those moments, Romania. And I think that in Italian cinema, really from the end of the war through, I don't know, the 90s or something.
Maybe 90s is too much.
Possibly. Yeah, it might be. Yeah, it is. It's true. But I mean, there was it's so rich. It's so, as you say, he's not looking with a condemning, in condemnation. He's just interested in how they speak, how they communicate with each other. And then in the surprise of like, it doesn't really matter what Hanna Schygulla at that point in her career and in her life says or does. She's every time she's on screen, she's just magical.
What a cast, by the way. Harvey Keitel plays Thomas Paine.
Right, that's right.
Yeah,
Thomas Paine.
And again, the king is played by Michel Piccoli.
That's right.
Who else is in the film?
Yeah.
Laura Betti. Yes. Who was a muse for the Pasolini film, but also for other great filmmakers such as the Taviani. How do you like contemporary Italian cinema? Rohrwacher, Garrone, Sorrentino, Rosi?
I mean, personally, I relate to Alice Rohrwacher's movies, the most.
Alice?
I find them... I like
she has
her.
quite a unique voice.
She does. Yeah.
Although you can see the influence from Olmi, maybe Pasolini, but
Well, it's hard for Italian filmmakers because the influence, the past it's great when there's a glorious past, but it's also a weight on people's shoulders, and that's difficult, I mean, you think of what a composer at the beginning of the 20th century had to cope with, to think about what had come before, and it's you can see what Schoenberg, the reason that he reacted the way that he did, and I think that it's the same thing is true of Italian filmmakers. How do you distinguish yourself and become yourself as a filmmaker, but then at the same time you have this extraordinary past behind you?
And going back to what you said before, differently from the 70s, 80s, or 60s, we have definitely talented filmmakers, the name that we just mentioned. Mm-hmm. But the average of Italian cinema is not as great
not so
as,
great.
Which means that the industry and the cinema itself is not.
That's a little bit true around the world, I'm afraid.
Here too, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Few great talents, Maybe there are exceptions now in Romania. There are a few.
But that moment it's very difficult.
It's already passed, maybe.
It's so difficult for I know Cristian Mungiu really well and Cristi Puiu, and it's very, very difficult for them to get their films together.
And 10 years ago, we would have said Mexicans.
Yeah.
Now they all moved here.
Yeah,
yes, they all work in Hollywood. Okay, let's go to Ken's second choice, an American film, and a great one. I'm always very moved by this kiss. Mm-hmm. Why this film by Cassavetes? We know it's a giant of American cinema. Why this particular film?
I mean, forgotten is a relative term. And a lot of the time I tend to think in conversations with people these days that the majority of films are forgotten because they're not discussed by, the average customer, with the same urgency that they were when I was young, when you were young. I think, not that we're both young, old, but I think, but then, obviously Cassavetes is known, and this is on the Criterion channel and part of it. But I think also that he's a filmmaker that people tend to want to cite, talk about more than the actual digging into the work. Sometimes, and I think that this film.
Which won the Golden Bear in Berlin.
Yeah, and it was made for Canon, and he had a little bit more money than, but it's still shot in the house, and it's still a homemade film, as you can see from any 2 seconds of it. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this particular film is because I find that it's his most, he's an artist who really, really grew. He was an immense artist, and I think that when he made this film, the idea of people who want to love, who always embrace love, they go to it, and then they go away from it immediately, and then they go towards it, and then away from it immediately, and that's the film, and the manic, and what's scary about the film is the manic nature of it, the manic impulses. So, his manic impulse is to take the son that he doesn't really know on a trip suddenly, to Las Vegas, and then leave him in a hotel room because he's, her manic impulse in this instance is obviously to gather together all these animals. And by the way, for those of you who don't know the film, they play brother and sister in this one, not husband and wife. And
stylistically, it's quite different. There is very little camera used with the hands, and it's very still, differently from his other films.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's possible, but I think it's more concentrated, and also I think very moving because you can see him physically deteriorating.
Yes,
before your eyes.
Yeah.
He looks like, but he was. I think he was apparently just as joyful right to the end. It's just that he was, his liver was distended. I mean, he was really like,
If I ask you what this film is really about, what would you say?
Well, it's about the urge to love and the terror of love, the urge to intimacy and being scared of intimacy, of wanting to share and wanting to hide, and how they're on the razor's edge And I find that, and it plays out in a kind of a magical, realist way with the animals gathered together, and then there's an extraordinary, rainstorm, and they have to gather the animals all in together, and she comes to see him, and then she leaves. So I find it's a very powerful film about that push-pull in people.
Can we say the same about Cassavetes, meaning he's a unique filmmaker? Although he influenced many filmmakers, but today there is no one like him, no one that is definitely a hair or...
Well, there never is anyone like, I think that the influence was more in, people haven't, the term director is a little bit misleading in the sense that it implies the idea that, you're like, people's idea of a director would be on the one hand Alfred Hitchcock and on the other hand Stanley Kubrick. So they're both, just controlling every square inch. But I mean, if you really look at their films closely, you can see that part of that is mythical because what they're doing is they're responding to a moment. If a film is just like the enactment of a plan that's in your head, it's dead in the water. We've all seen films like that. Some people, try to elevate them. But I mean, they're just like, they don't come alive. The reason that Hitchcock's films come alive, it has more to do with the embrace of surprise with the actors, and the same thing with Kubrick. And I think that it's a constant tension between control and release. With Cassavetes, obviously the act of discovery is like at the core of what he's doing, but there's also but the core is solid, rock solid, and I think that it allows him to go into areas that no other filmmaker really does. He inspires people, and he sets an example for other directors to work with their actors and to respond to them and to let them take a lead, to follow their instincts. I think that it's a really important example that he set.
My second choice is also an American film, and two of my favorite actors are in the film. Let's watch it. I think in the 70s, American cinema was the best in the world.
Mm.
And this is a forgotten film, but it won the Palme d'Or in Cannes.
Yeah.
And Jerry Schatzberg is quite forgotten, unfortunately.
Still alive and well.
Yes,
how old
he's
is Jerry?
95.
95,
yeah. He started as a photographer.
He certainly did.
Yeah, this is his best film. I don't know if you're familiar with Scarecrow. There is something in common with Midnight Cowboy, which came a year earlier. I think this is a better...
A few years earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Much more pure. I read recently a review by Anthony Lane on The New Yorker on a film called Donnie Brasco with Al Pacino.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you're familiar with Donnie Brasco. It starts with the eyes of Al Pacino. And Anthony Lane writes, nobody has these eyes since El Greco stopped painting the saints.
Mm.
And it's interesting because nobody can convey at the same time terror, horror, and sainthood as Pacino.
Yeah.
And even in this scene, you have and you feel tenderness and fear, horror and love, and the contrast between the gigantic Gene Hackman and Pacino is clearly out of his mind.
Mm.
It is what makes the scene so vital.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you feel so empathetic with this man who is suffering and is doing something probably terrible.
Mm-hmm.
How do you like this film? Do you agree with me?
No, it's excellent. I mean, I think that what you're saying about American cinema in the 70s is true because, look, these people are down and out, just like the two people in Midnight Cowboy, just like the characters in film after film after film. I mean, you look at the dilemma that the strange thing that Jack Nicholson's character does in 5 Easy Pieces, going to live, this life that is completely alien from the one that he grew up with, and then feeling alienated from it when he returns to it and from the other world that he's gone to. And I think that I think that it's so rare now, and it's so odd that it's so rare to see films about people who are down and out, unless it's underlined and done as a thesis or something like that, which is not to really make a film. It's to just kind of, do a thesis. But I think, with these guys, with these actors, the way that they were able to work, the way that Cassavetes worked, the way that Marty Scorsese worked when he started making Mean Streets and Taxi Driver. You see people who are exploring and who are unafraid of looking at things that are
you feel
difficult to
that
deal
they
with.
need to make these films.
Yeah.
There is an urgency that
Yeah.
it's almost impossible to find today, with few exceptions, of course.
Yeah. That's right. I think that's true.
Let's go now to Ken's third choice. It's an American film by a great German filmmaker.
Yeah. Written by a great German author.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't spoil too much.
Okay.
Maybe we should reveal who is the author of the screenplay.
He's not really credited as the author of the screenplay, but he did write it, Bertolt Brecht.
Generally, reviewers consider the American film directed by Lang inferior to the German films, and maybe they are, but
So shows how much they know. I think that has more to do with the fact that the films that he made at UFA from the silent era through the early sound era, I guess the last one is The Testament of Dr. Mabuse, right? Are graphically, visually, so it's like you're watching a.
Think of Metropolis or M.
Metropolis, Dr. Mabuse, Der Spieler, both parts, the Kriemhild's Revenge and Siegfried, not in that order. The Woman on the Moon, Spies. Every frame of them is burned into your brain, and so is every sound. Everything follows everything else so precisely. And so this idea of Lang, giving you a kind of a spider's web pattern of fate is not inaccurate. It's just that the experience of his films is even scarier than that. And he really, he and Brecht really wanted to portray the nature of the terror that the Nazis perpetrated,
Do you know the documentary, actually the interview that William Friedkin made to Fritz Lang?
Oh, yeah.
There is an incredible document. You can see it on YouTube. It's 40 minutes or 50 minutes.
Something like that, yeah.
And among many things, Lang explains how he escaped from Germany after a meeting with Goebbels.
Yeah. But
please.
He made up a story about that. His story is that Goebbels offered him the directorship of UFA. He said, "Let me think about it," and then he packed his bags and left for Paris that night. Actually, I've been at the Film Museum in Berlin. I've seen his passport, and he went back and forth to Germany and Paris many times.
That.
Yeah. But it's a good story. Yeah.
According to the interview, when Goebbels proposed to direct for them, Lang said, "I must say that my mother is Jewish."
Right.
And Goebbels responded, "Don't worry, we decided who is Aryan."
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And do you like his other American films?
Well, sure. I think that his films are they're penetrating and very nerve-wracking, I must say. And it's, I find that I can watch a lot of films by a given director, and to explore their work and to look at films by, a lot of films in a row. It's an interesting thing, to do it with Billy Wilder, for instance, or, but with Lang, at a certain point, you're just like, I don't know if I can, some are better than others, some of them are extremely threadbare, like the last two American films, Beyond a Reasonable Doubt and While the City Sleeps. This one was made independently because it's very strong medicine, and I don't think that the studios really were all that interested in. And
it's about the murder of Reinhard Heydrich.
Reinhard Heydrich,
who was the Heinrich Himmler right arm,
Yeah.
one of the most feared and horrible Nazi criminal.
Yeah.
And by the way, they're making an American film. It will come out soon, probably terrible, but
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
based on the same story.
Yeah, well, it won't be this. I mean, this is a pretty extraordinary film, and it was a film that was possible to see for many years in a slightly truncated version. So the complete version is available now.
Okay, let's watch my third and final choice. It's an Italian film. It's a little gem directed by Federico Fellini in an ensemble piece called Boccaccio 70. It's a little film, almost a joke, but there are so many typical Fellinian elements, you know, the big dominating woman, Anita Ekberg from La Dolce Vita. This film was made between La Dolce Vita and 8.5, and it's the very first film that he shot in color.
Ah, this was the first color film.
And second, his fascination with comedians, especially clowns. Peppino De Filippo is famous in Italy not only as the brother of Edoardo De Filippo, but for the films that he made with Totò. Yeah. But critically was never recognized. Fellini was the very first to give him, a chance, as he will do later in Amarcord with Ciccio Ingrassia.
Right.
And then there is the fascination with Eur. For some reason, Fellini loved this quarter on the south side of Rome, built mostly during the fascism, which is architecturally quite a beautiful place. You can see also in La Dolce Vita several scenes set in Rome. And it's about this hypocrite, this bigot, who is obsessed by these huge posters and by this woman who comes to life. If you haven't seen it, it's really joyful and funny. And it's part of an ensemble film called Boccaccio 70, inspired by the great work of Boccaccio. The other directors are Vittorio De Sica, Luchino Visconti, Fellini, of course, and Monicelli. When the film was invited in Cannes, the producer decided to cut the Monicelli film and episode, and Fellini, De Sica, and Visconti decided not to attend the screening in sign of solidarity. Are you a Fellini fan?
Oh God!
I mean, everybody is, but
but he was one of those figures who, when I was growing up, was so discussed so constantly. I mean, that you would try to resist him, but then, of course,
But in the world of historian,
he's immense. I mean, it's an amazing thing to go back and watch his films again. They're maybe some of the later films you can say, the last few, but I mean, really, they're among the greatest films ever made. And that includes, there's another short film that he made as part of
Toby
Toby Dammit as part of the omnibus film.
I think that's a masterpiece.
Spirits of the Dead. Yeah, it is a masterpiece. Film.
What I was saying, that generally film historian, film critics are divided into Antonioni team and Fellini team, and they're generally.
Are they still? Is that still a thing?
I mean, I am on the Fellini team, but I must say that Antonioni is a little bit forgotten now.
Yeah, but isn't everybody?
Yes, true.
I mean, I feel like it's an odd thing for me to see a phenomenon of people who imagine that they can discard the past or not pay any attention to it because someone else is or something like that. And I'm not saying that, I don't want to be, that's I'm sure that'll change. But it's a little bit prevalent right now, and that's kind of odd. I mean, I feel like there's so many things that seem forgotten, because I think Bob Dylan said recently, he said, the present has just kind of wiped out the past. So, it's important to, and so the things that you take for granted, when I was young, everybody talked about Fellini, everybody talked about Bergman, everybody talked about Stanley Kubrick, Last Tango in Paris, and I don't just mean people who were interested in movies,
But besides our friends at Criterion,
right,
and it's difficult now to find an Antonioni retrospective, or more difficult than a Fellini or even I don't know, Godard or Bergman retrospective. And I'm not saying that it's right, but it's just a little bit more forgotten.
Well, sometimes you have to wait you know, and for the right moment. And it's possible that the right moment will come along again. You know, I remember when I programmed something with Bruce Goldstein years ago, and he was like, "That's a great idea." What?
Film Forum?
At Film Forum, yeah. And he said, "That's a great idea. Let's not do it right away." And I was like, "Why can't we?" And he said, "Well, I'm not sure if it's the right time." And he waited and waited, and then he was like, "Okay, now it's time." You know, and that was interesting to me because
do you remember
it was the 70s before it became, you know, the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, but it was like it was in 1996. It was called Out of the 70s, and you know, we showed Scarecrow and A Woman Under the Influence, and you know, Dusty and Sweets McGee and Two-Lane Blacktop and all that stuff. But yeah,
Before screening the little surprise, if you could pick a retrospective, which one would you do? Who would you pay homage to today?
you mean someone who's forgotten, or you know?
No, someone you...
Well, I mean, you know, we were talking about different possibilities, you and I, and we were also talking about you know, there's so many things to choose from. I mean, you know, we could have chosen, you know, 90 more combinations of 3 films, you know, other than the ones that we did. One of the filmmakers that I thought of was Vittorio De Seta, and it's a very small body of work, but it's an amazing one. And I mean, the film that a lot of people know or knew at the time was Bandits of Orgosolo, Banditi di Orgosolo.
Banditi Orgosolo, it's an extraordinary film, yeah.
But then, you know, at a certain point, people started showing those extraordinary documentaries that he made in color in the 50s. And I mean, boy, those are unlike anything else I've ever seen. And then An Uomo a Metà, and his, you know, film about the teacher. I mean, he was and
he's a forgotten great filmmaker.
He is. Yeah. Okay. Tonight.
Now a little surprise.
How about you? Before I go, what would
Sam
you?
Peckinpah.
Sam Peckinpah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know
as long as Criterion came up, we should plug that new disc of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, because I must say that's an event.
I think it's an extraordinary film.
That's something.
Now, we have a little surprise, which is a tradition. Since, with the exception of the Fellini, our films are quite sad, I have a comic relief for you. And I picked, Ken doesn't know it, one of my favorite among the funny films by Mel Brooks. Let's watch it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Our next event will be on the 25th at the New York Society Library with Henry Finder. Thank you.